Hey legends, and welcome back to the Sim Racing channel, where we're covering the ACC GT4 pack one last time. Today, we're shooting all 11 cars out, head to head, on Brands Hatch under identical circumstances. Rather than being a purely scientific test, this is instead going to be a chance for me to drive the cars as hard as I can within the first few laps of familiarizing myself with them, and conveying to you the sensation of how they compare to one another, as well as what I feel their performance potential might be given the short hot lap stints. Straight out of the gate, what I can say is that Kunos have done a great job rendering unique handling characteristics for each of the 11 cars. It truly feels like driving completely different vehicles, and with the added playfulness of the GT4 class, allows for a lot more driving expression than the GT3s have to this point. While ACC continues to be a weak point of mine, and I'm not a particularly strong driver in it, my reference hot lap for this test was done in the McLaren 570S at 1:32.1. Because this car got the largest amount of my time over the last 2 days, it's unfair to compare that figure to the rest, and will instead just consider it a benchmark. The closer the rest get to it, the better their performance potential, at least for my driving style. It should be said that all cars are being driven at their aggressive presets, with very minor tweaks done to tyre pressures in order to keep them as close as possible to 26.5 psi. While this is by no means an end-all test, it should hopefully give you an idea of which of the 11 cars you may gel best with, given your own driving style and what you prefer a car to feel like. Before we get to the test, make sure to smash that sub in order to stay up to date with all major ACC content, as well as general sim racing news and reviews in the future. Let's get into it. Starting out in alphabetical order, we've got the Alpine A110, which in its road-faring version is a turbocharged 1.8 litre 4-cylinder, I believe front engine. Now, this car has a very interesting handling character, as you're about to see. Coming here into the Paddock Hill bend, the car tends to exhibit some very notable mid-corner oversteer, and if you don't actually tweak the setup, it'll bottom out right at the bottom. The rear wheels will catch and you'll literally just spin right off the track. It was the only car out of the entire lot that had this character on the default aggressive setup, maybe because it doesn't have bump stops, or the bump stops aren't adjustable, I don't know, but I had to tweak this using both the suspension firmness and also the ride height. As you can see, car exhibiting that mid-corner oversteer effect, which I kind of found difficult to predict and difficult to account for. ACC, of course, still having that interesting feeling when cars are on the limit. I don't find it as snappy and responsive as perhaps, real life. But, it is what it is. So cars still exhibiting this behavior, it kind of makes it interesting to surf and fight with it mid-corner. It's certainly kind of exuberant to drive, but it may not be the quickest way around a racecourse. As you can see, continuously kind of struggling with that character. I can't say it was my favorite car out of the lot. It was certainly an interesting one. It's very unique in its handling in a way that none of the other cars are. I'm coming around, almost finished with the lap now. At least it's consistent in its behavior, right? If you know to anticipate it, you'll be counter-steering through most corners. Or if you're better than me, you can tune it out of the car. So that's the Alpine A110. It achieved the lap somewhere just in the high 133s, so it was definitely among the slowest cars that I've tested for my driving style, probably factoring in all of that mid-corner counter-steering and sliding, so not the quickest way around a racetrack indeed. Let me know if you guys have better luck with it. So nothing in particular really stood out to me as defining the Aston Martin V8 Vantage. It's somewhere in between the BMW M4 and the AMG. Its handling character is smack bang in the middle of those two. Fairly honest, with maybe some corner entry or mid-corner understeer type character which you may be able to dial out. But it's nothing that really stood out to me as either gelling with my driving style or not gelling with it. It's sort of just the car that if it were picked and I had to drive it, I would make do with, and I'd be, I guess, perfectly happy with. It's very honest to your inputs, no crazy idiosyncrasies that I remember. I do recall one of the cars on this list had a tendency to understeer, then oversteer, then understeer again. So corner entry understeer, mid-corner oversteer, then corner exit understeer. I'm pretty sure it was the Alpine and not this one, but be aware of that character between these two cars. It's definitely one of them. I think it's much more likely to be the Alpine than it was this one. But I do recall that had I to pick a car with this sort of a chassis layout, I would probably pick either the BMW or the AMG, or possibly even the Camaro if I wanted to have fun just kind of going off-road and not caring about curbs whatsoever. Has that very impressive V8 sound to it, kind of like the AMG. But beyond that, for me personally, nothing very remarkable to speak of. I'm sure a very skilled and capable operator could get world-leading times out of this thing. I believe I got a 133 flat, which puts it on even footing with the AMG for my driving style. The mighty Audi R8 GT4. Now this car was like a breath of fresh air to me. Coming off the McLaren 570S, this had that same pinpoint mid-engine honest character to it that I've come to expect and that I so enjoy in racing sims and cars in general. So the very first thing I really appreciated about this car was staying true to the other sims that I've driven it in. It has a very neutral and very balanced presentation. It's very pinpoint, it turns in when you need it to turn in, it accelerates when you need it to accelerate. And because the gearing is so short, you can use engine braking mid-corner, as you're about to see here. There you go. To kind of keep it exactly where you need it to be, keep the torque where you need it to be, power out of the corners, and get just the right amount of speed and rotation through a corner. So even though the Audi, in my experience, has never been the very best at one particular thing, for instance the Porsches are better at that mid-corner turn-in thing, perhaps the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis are better at the powering out of corners thing, but it just kind of has the best balance of all of those things. So if you have a good honest driving style, if you know how to trail brake, you know how to gradually accelerate out of corners, the Audi will always treat you very, very well. But I know that traditionally one of its drawbacks has been the lack of straight line performance, lack of straight line engine power. That being said, within about 2-3 laps, this car achieved one of the quickest times. I think it was somewhere in the mid 132s, which absolutely slayed the Alpine and got the closest to the McLaren 570S out of any of the cars that I've tested. So for me personally, 2 thumbs up for the Audi. The BMW M4, probably the finest example of a front-engined rear-wheel drive car that you're going to find in this class. It's somewhat like the AMG and somewhat like the Chevrolet Camaro, but in a way that's more balanced and neutral in its handling. It doesn't have the pendulum-y effect of the AMG, and it doesn't have the corner entry understeer of the Chevrolet Camaro. Also sounds quite impressive, very brassy. It's got that kind of fart coming through. You can even hear it on the onboard over the straight cut gears there. But as you can see, very honest to my inputs, just kind of doing what it's asked to do. I think it very quickly achieved one of the quickest lap times I was able to achieve in a front-engine car, and bearing in mind that I'm not very frequently a front-engine driver when it comes to games like this, so I was very, very impressed at its overall neutrality. And it's probably, if I were to say, you know, if you wanted an introductory car to this class, if you wanted to try one of the GT4s to see what you've paid your money for, to see what you've bought into, I would say try the BMW M4. This car is probably the best ambassador for this class out of anything that's there. Takes the curbs very easily. You can see a bit of stepping out on the corner exit there, so if you ever drive it, it will definitely let you know. Takes the curbs, no problems whatsoever. Real big fan of the way this car sounds, strangely. At least from the inside, not so much from the outside, from the ones that I've seen in person. But yes, coming up to the end here, I believe this was one of, if not the fastest front-engined cars around this track in a few very short laps. I think it achieved a 1:32.8 or something to that effect, which is very good given that I didn't give it that many laps. The Chevrolet Camaro. Now this was a complete sleeper hit for me. As you can see, didn't exactly start this lap on the best of terms with it, and actually highlights one of its main domineering handling characteristics. That is tremendous corner entry understeer. If you find a way to wrangle past that, this car can actually get you quite far because it eats curbs as if they don't even exist. I don't know if it's its ride height, if it's its suspension arrangement, or just the chassis of the car, but you can literally go partially off-road in this thing, do your best lawnmower line, and get your times that way. Just absolutely doesn't care. Look, partially off-road on the grass, didn't even unsettle the car, didn't even have to do anything to correct for that. Very, very fun car to drive. Sounds absolutely amazing on board, hope you agree. And so long as you're gentle with it, as long as you make sure to slow down enough entering the corners, it'll really look after you. I've never really thought of this chassis as much of a race car, and maybe it can't hold up in the higher leagues like the GT3s or the GTEs, but as far as the GT4s go, it's quite fun. And, you know, if you tinker with it a little bit, you may even be able to dial out the worst of that corner entry understeer. Watching it take curbs is just... it's like a ballet of brutality. It's like they're not even there. This is the only car that I actually took the time to give it my own custom paint job, just because I love the look of that fluoro yellow thing so much on it. I think from memory, this car achieved a time in the upper 132s, just like the BMW, if I'm not mistaken. Very impressive, less neutral than the BMW, but still highly fun to drive. The Ginetta G55 is the car that's no stranger to this channel. If you saw a couple of videos ago, we shot this car out at Mount Panorama against AMS2's equivalent version of it. I was quite impressed with its handling in that video and continue to be even here. It's not one of the quickest cars in the class, at least not when I drive it, but it's one of the most honest handling and one of the easiest to sort of wrangle around the race course. As far as front engine rear wheel drive chassis go, it's probably second only to the BMW M4. Very, very honest to your inputs. A very good car to actually learn the class on. You can see it doesn't quite take the curbs with the same grace and elegance as the Camaro. But as long as you're easy on the inputs and you respect the car, it'll respect you back. Maybe not so much with the lap times themselves, but with continual performance across the track. It's a good car to race if you maybe want to gimp yourself, if you want to give yourself an extra challenge against the rest of the field, unless there's something I'm missing and you guys want to let me know down below, but I didn't find this to be one of the highest performing contenders. It seemed to drop around about a second compared to the other cars. That being said, as you can see, a fairly neutral handling character. Sometimes it'll step out a little bit of mid-corner oversteer if you're too aggressive. But it's nothing tragic. The dampers aren't ideal, sometimes they shoot the car out with mid-corner or corner exit understeer, but short of that, very responsive car, very fun to drive, and just very balanced all around. And this car achieved a 133 flat, which is around about a second off the McLaren's pace. Not horribly bad, but certainly not as good as some of the other cars. Speaking of sleeper hits, the KTM Crossbow was about the king of them for me, so this car impressed me about as much as the Audi R8 did. I didn't really know very much about this car going into this, but within about a lap or two I knew that it resonated with my driving style immensely. Super honest handling characteristic. I actually don't know what the chassis layout is, but based on how it handles, I'm guessing that it's mid-engined. Super honest. Really likes to rotate mid-corner, except for when you come in too hot like there and it shoots out wide. Completely my mistake, and even though there were a few notable mistakes in this run, this car still managed a 132.8, which is remarkable for a run that was, you know, littered with as many mistakes as this one was. Given that it was probably my third run through the track with this car, as you can see, shooting out way wide here, that cost me about a half second. So this car would have been able to go parity 1-to-1 with the McLaren 570S easily. Between the McLaren, the Audi, and the KTM, I would say these are probably three of the strongest performers. If you drive like I do, the car is just super responsive. It just loves to turn. It loves to get the track munched. They're just super honest. Really nothing bad to speak of, and I don't know how the track limits didn't get me there. I went full lawnmower line, but hey, ACC be ACC, right? Once again, as you can see, I kind of enjoyed half sliding this car through some of the more aggressive corners. I think that's where it made up for most of its lost time due to the overshot ones. But super enjoyable car. Give it my 2 thumbs up. Really, really enjoyed it. Got a time in the high 132s, even in spite of the many, many rookie mistakes I made during this lap. Definitely give it a shot. The Maserati Gran Turismo MC. What's to say about this car? You can probably already see with the way that I'm driving it that it's exceptionally unique when put up along the rest of the GT4 lineup. So this is the only car in the package that has no assists, as you can see, coming down the bend here. Oh my god. So, it was a heck of a lot of fun to drive, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be the king of lap times. So, no TC, no ABS, just a heck of a lot of engine and exhaust attitude and insane downshifts. So aggressive. Basically slide halfway through. It's sort of like if the Alpine's handling characteristics were set to their ultimate extremes. Really good bit of fun. If you really want to test the limits of ACC's handling model to feel how the force feedback communicates handling at the limit to see whether you gel with the game's driving model, this is the one to find that out, because there are no assists. It's possibly, I think, the only car thus far to be rendered with no assists out of the entire lineup of cars in this game. It's a really good way to get a good glimpse into the handling model with no TC and ABS in the way. All things considered, I actually found it quite good, and I think the time that it achieved was something like a high 133 or maybe a 134 flat, which, given the amount of sliding I had to do and the over braking and everything, it was actually quite remarkable. I think you could get some okay pace in this car if you really learned its ins and outs and idiosyncrasies and learned to account for all the crazy things that it do for you mid-corner. As you can see, I was really letting off there. I didn't want to spin and bin the car on my 3rd or 4th lap or whatever this was. I mostly just wanted to get it over with so we can move on to the rest of the field. Definitely give it a shot if you want to try out the ins and outs of ACC's driving model. My pride and joy, and the car I had to wrangle myself away from buying in the real world a few times. The 570S to me is just the pinnacle of what I enjoy in a car of this class. Now, it has some idiosyncrasies, don't get me wrong, alright? There's some prominent mid-corner understeer. I don't quite know where that's coming from or whether it can be tuned out. It's something I'll definitely aim to tune out in the future. But this is the car I spent the largest amount of time on out of all of them. It's the car that gave me by far my quickest lap time, up amongst the Audi and the KTM. I think the KTM could be a strong contender if I gave it the same amount of time. But the McLaren is just so fun. You can just hear that V8 roaring around in the back. Just the abrasiveness of the downshifts. Just the fact that the torque is always there when you need it. It's always kind of rotating. It's got that mid-engine character to it. I love it. I love how small it is. I love that small mid-engine coupe sort of vibe. I think it's perfect for the GT4 class. It doesn't handle curbs as well as some of the larger cars. That sort of goes without saying. Maybe you'll see an example of that here. You can see the curbs are sort of shooting it out and emphasizing that mid-corner understeer effect. Definitely something you have to learn to drive around. Again, lending credence to this pack because each car has its own unique personality, and unlike the GT3s, you get so much for this. Like, it's 11 truly unique motor vehicles. They feel so much closer to road cars. They have the exuberance of road cars. They're a little too heavy. They're a little underpowered. They're a little under-aeroed for what they are. But man, do I love this car. Love this lap. This is by far the quickest lap of the session. 2 thumbs up. Give the McLaren a go if you think you're ready for it. I think it's the quickest straight line car in the game presently. The AMG GT3. What's to say? This is probably the car where the engine is displaced the furthest amount forward from the driver out of any others in the lineup. And other than that roaring V8 sounding absolutely amazing, the other effect that you feel is, well, basically that pendulum swing of having the engine so far in front of you. You almost feel like the front end is sort of getting away from you and you're just kind of swinging around trying to catch up, like it's some kind of emphasized classic Batmobile that you're driving. Very, very cool and super unique, and amazing that that sensation has been rendered so vividly, especially coming off something completely different like the McLaren. Really enjoyed driving this car. It's almost like driving a comfy sofa or something. It's definitely more of a statesman car, definitely more of a refined vehicle. Not for us. Not for us hoons, you know? Not for us JDM guys, but I appreciate it all the same. So it's almost like if you, I don't actually know its name, but that Olympic sport where a very, very strong person just kind of swings around that heavy object on a rope, just kind of swings it around in circles and circles and circles and just lets it go and lets it swing off into the distance. It's like you are that heavy object as the driver and the person swinging is the engine. That's kind of how you feel, just kind of pivoting around the center point. Like, it just turns into the corners in this amazing way, but the moment you apply the power, it just understeers instantly. So it's definitely a two-faceted car. bit of a double-edged sword as it were. And to the kind of people who enjoy that handling characteristic, I'm sure you can extract great performance out of this. I only managed to get a 133, which is about a second off my McLaren pace, but that is once again because I'm not much of a big driver of these types of cars. Still highly approved, lots of fun, sounds amazing. The Porsche Cayman represents a car that I both don't know how to drive because I'm not much of a Porsche guy, and also represents one of the cars that pulled one of the slowest lap times for me, minus the unassisted Maserati. So, I'm not really sure what to say about this car. It doesn't exhibit enough of that rear engine character, at least its benefits, to be worthwhile to me personally. I don't get as much of that insane mid-corner turn-in as I do with the GT3 variant to make it viable. You still get that power application understeer, but the car just, it doesn't have as much of those Porsche extremes as I'm used to personally. I'm just not really getting that same vibe, but it still requires a completely different handling approach to the other vehicles. You almost have to unlearn how to drive and learn its particular way, do most of your braking in a straight line, let the car coast through the turn, and then apply the power on complete corner exit. I don't necessarily like having to unlearn driving to that extent to just apply it to one type of vehicle, but again, your mileage may differ. If you're the kind of person who enjoys vehicles that have the Porsche archetype, then this is probably your guy. So you can see a lot of scrubbing there. I just wasn't gelling with it. I couldn't really get it in the sweet spot. I think this ended up having one of the slowest lap times of all assisted cars, somewhere in the 133.2 mark. Some of my friends have told me they quite like this car and it's actually their favorite, so it's probably going to come down to the individual here. I'm definitely more of a mid-engine McLaren kind of boy. But give this one a go if it fits your archetype of what a race car is. Well, that's the shootout all done. Hopefully it's given you an idea of which of the 11 new cars you might gel best with. This is the last video we're going to do on this content, at least for a while, so stay tuned for our upcoming feature doing a head-to-head comparison of ACC's Ferrari 488 GT3 with rFactor 2's upcoming rendering of the same car. I'm super excited for that video, with both games being industry leaders in GT car rendering in their own respective ways. It should truly be a battle between titans. Until next time, be sure to hit the sub, and we'll see you then.